Hello and welcome to the SAP HANA Academy. I am Dennis Van Kampen, and in this video tutorial series we will discuss SAP HANA 2.0. The topic of this video tutorial is what's new with security. A good place to find out what's new in the SAP HANA Platform 2.0 is to check the release notes. You can find them online on the SAP Help portal, help.sap.com, or download the PDF. And if we then go to the section on security, the first topic mentioned are the changes to the documentation. And we can read that there is a new chapter on data protection in the security guide and a new chapter on HANA Access Advanced in the checklist and recommendations guide. So let's take a brief look at both guides. Here we have our security guide. It's about 274 pages. And here chapter 10, Data Protection in SAP HANA, a new chapter that explains the concepts, the SAP HANA approach on data protection, with a separate paragraph on the deletion of personal data. For the rest, most of the security guide is pretty much the same as with the previous edition, although of course you'll find some new information about topics that have changed, for example the new SAP HANA Cockpit. The SAP HANA Security Checklist and Recommendations Guide is a bit shorter, it's about 36 pages, and here we have a new chapter on HANA Access Advanced model with recommendations for the Access A administration user, organizations and spaces, and network configuration. So this whole section is new. The other topics in the guides, for example, the checklist for secure handover, or the different recommendations for the SAP HANA database, are roughly the same. If security is important to you or your business, make sure you're familiar with this guide. So that's it for documentation changes. And now let's take a look what's new and changed for database security. 3 sections: encryption, authorization, and I already mentioned it, security administration with the new SAP HANA Cockpit. For encryption, 2 bullet points. The HANA database now supports redo lock encryption. This is new. And there's been an enhancement for encryption root key management. So this is changed. Now what has changed is that your root key management can now be done using SQL entirely. And there's a new system privilege encryption root key admin that is required to change the root keys. And finally, it is very convenient, you can now create a backup of the root keys. So how does this work? For this, let's briefly consult the administration guide, chapter 7, security administration, and then paragraph 7.4, managing data encryption in SAP HANA. Here we have an illustration that shows us the concept. The whole box is SAP HANA. On the left we have HANA running in memory, and to the right we have HANA on disk or storage or persistence, whatever you want to call it. So we have data volume encryption. This was introduced with SPS 09 about 2 years ago, and now with HANA 2.0 we also have log volume encryption. Data volume encryption is done with a page key, which is generated by a root key, and both the root key for the data volume encryption and the log volume encryption are stored in the instance SSFS. Now as you can see, we have 3 root keys here: the green one for data volume encryption, the blue one for the log volume encryption, and the orange one for security relevant application data. For example, an application that wants to store credit card data in the HANA database will use the application encryption service, and this is generated by a root key stored in the instance SSFS. Think of the SSFS as a safe stored on the file system, hence the name secure storage on the file system. It's a technology also used with SAP ABAP systems. There are 2 SSFSs. We got the instance SSFS and the system PKI SSFS. In the second safe, root certificates for internal communication are stored. For example, communication between the processes, HTTP name server, HTTP index server, and so on. There are a couple of them. But also when HANA is running as a distributed system, we have multiple hosts communicating. Other examples you can think of is for dynamic tiering, when we have the main memory store and the extended storage where the communication can be encrypted. Or for example, when you use replication. Now most of the internal communication encryption happens automatically. There's not much to manage here, except of course to change the SSFS master keys, at least when you receive HANA as an appliance from the hardware vendor, or when you use HANA Express as a virtual machine. This is all documented, of course, in the security recommendations guide we just looked at. We see the whole flow documented here on how to go about system handover. So if you're new to this topic, you might want to take a look at this section. Then if we return to our first illustration, I also have to mention the new password protected backup of the root keys. So this concerns the 3 root keys stored in the instance SSFS. Okay, let's return to the release notes. Next topic is authorization. New is that you can now use an LDAP compliant identity management server to manage user authorizations. And this works with group membership. There are many different types of LDAP identity management servers out there. Microsoft Active Directory is probably the most well-known. SAP also has one. And there are open source LDAP providers, and they all can be used. This is documented in the security guide, LDAP group authorizations. And basically what happens is that you grant roles mapped to LDAP groups. You create your LDAP provider using SQL. Here we see the statement. Then when you create your user, you specify that the authorization is performed by LDAP. And then there's also a validate LDAP provider statement to check if this is all working with a new view, LDAP users, and the column authorization mode added to the users view. Also new is that you can now convert a restricted user into a standard user. Restricted users were introduced with SPS 10 of HANA 1, and they do not have the public role, so they cannot view data in the HANA database, and also they do not have the privilege to create objects in their own schema, because with restricted users the whole authorization is happening at the application server layer and not at the SAP HANA database layer. Now new in HANA 2.0 is that you can both grant or revoke the public role and grant or revoke the create object privilege in one's own schema, and this allows you in fact to convert a restricted user into a standard user. Previously you had to drop the restricted user and recreate it. Finally, we have the topic security administration with the SAP HANA cockpit. We already looked at it briefly, so now let's take a more closer look. Here we have the new SAP HANA cockpit 2.0. There's a separate video that will go into more detail about the cockpit itself. Here we will focus just on the security aspects, so I will select this link here, security, which will bring us to the security overview page. We have 4 tiles, one on data storage security, one on auditing, one on authentication, and one with security related links. Some of the related links will open different apps, for example, to manage certificates. There's also a link that will show you network security information, for example, the cryptographic provider being used. There's online documentation about using security administration with the SAP HANA cockpit. And there are also links to the SAP HANA security website on sap.com, which is a great source of information with links to white papers and other resources, like for example the SAP HANA Academy. The security checklist link will open the checklist guide we looked at previously. Then for the 3 main tiles, I will start with authentication. Here we can see the last time the system user password was changed, whether single sign-on is configured, and what password policy is active. Select it, and the password policy editor will be opened. And here you can configure your minimum password lengths, whether to use lowercase or uppercase, etc. Now this hasn't really changed, but what's important is that you can do it all over the web. The same for the password blacklist. The auditing tile shows us whether it's enabled or not, what the audit trail target is, and the number of enabled or disabled audit policies selected, and the auditing app will open, and here we can configure the system settings for auditing or create or disable audit policies. Finally, we have the data storage security tile we've already talked about. We see the last time the SSFS master key for both the instance and the system PKI were changed. We can enable data volume encryption here by toggling this button. It's not yet possible to enable log volume encryption using this tile, but my guess is that will be added soon. And selecting the tile will show you the status of data volume encryption. Here you can change the root key, and here you can, provided your volumes are encrypted, decrypted, or if they're decrypted, you can encrypt them. Then also new, if we scroll up a little bit in the administration section, is that you can now select manage users to manage your HANA users. So you can, for example, reset the password, change authentication settings, and you also can create a new user, both standard and restricted. That's it for the security features of the SAP HANA Cockpit, and it also wraps up what's new with security for SAP HANA 2.0. You can find more videos on our YouTube channel, SAP HANA Academy. If you subscribe, we will keep you updated. If you like, you can connect with us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, or keep track about what's new on our Facebook page. And if you like this video, give it a thumb up. Okay, thank you for watching.